substance that you pushed on block. Now your life is off the hook and you move hot rock. You grew up without any guidance at home. Your mom's was always.
Today just kind of sobering experience, and well, I shouldn't say sobering experience as in the same way that one would say, oh, like somebody passed away and that was a sobering experience, but sobering experience is in the maintenance of being sober. Where kind of a comparative notion of how I'm thinking. What are the genres of thinking that take place more likely when I have recent sobriety, which is now, in comparison to kind of a trending of smoking, you know, or drinking, and smoking. Anyway, but the sobering, that to step back, a sobering experience for me in terms of reaching a point in life in terms of age. For those people who've seen me for some time, they've seen. I've been on the tubes on YouTube for about 12 years now, periodically. And I think I've developed slowly. I think I've developed esoterically. Kind of became more, I don't want to call it a moral realism unless it was prefixed with a narcissistic moral realism, not a projected notion of mores and moral practices that I would say that I abide by for a philosophical denomination of moral realism versus moral nihilism. I'd say I'm nihilistic in the kind of more on a personal sense in terms of how to make conjoining interpersonal projects as far as like good, significant long-term relationships or the raising of children or even personal organization or moving forward in career. Those are a bit scattered, and because those domains I'm kind of a throw together bricoleur, mastering what I think are a few things, attempting to escape the notion that I should attempt to master several other genres, because normally those would be for a younger man who is working to master fields in work or fields in solidifying an already grounded, like if one has a grounded homestead, then mastering different things in terms of like home projects, that to me is for a younger man or for a man who's attempting to deal with relationships with their children and grandchildren and the family relationship organization. Since I have no children and no grandchildren, the time drive to concern myself about progeny's systemic commitments to one another as a tribe or a family or a group, or their family political distinctions and diplomacies are kind of not so. Those would be concerns for a different uh, type of man, a man who held that position, I think. And because of the sobering event, to just get to that, is that is the recognition of the displacement away from the the genre of the age where you have color, and the age where you're gray, moving into the gray in terms of the average time when that happens to people, and that's variable all the way down to very young ages, um, excluding like albino individuals, but still individuals that gray in their late teens and early 20s, or individuals who go bald early, um, kind of take on a visual, a less than portrayal of health, meaning that their body doesn't exude that they're taking care of themselves. Um, so it's not about that. It was just the sobering of age as people get to their middle age. They roll over in, meaning prior to experiencing it, people are left a little bit. I mean, you're always outside of the phenomena until you experience the phenomena. So, as much as Wittgenstein or anyone could argue, oh, I know the pain of childbirth because the knowledge aspect of the pain is public. So any articulation of the expression is public to women who have never had kids and men who have never had kids. And but as far as the experience, that's then grouped in genres and schools and pockets and so forth. And so as I am moving into past the Rubicon, a very wide, the width of the Rubicon is a few years to transfer to gray. You or I mean, to generalize, me specifically, there was kind of for me a theos reminder, not a theocratic reminder, but a spoken accent that is coincidental with an environmental accent. And by accent, I mean a punctuated moment in time, like a glass being dropped and smashed at the same time. Let's say that a robber is intruding a house or entering into a house. The significance of the coincidence. This would normally be considered, I think, a lower level, and I do consider it a lower level, but informative form of theological reasoning and justification that a lot of people of faith shore up as their justification for belief in a God, or gods, or higher powers, or so forth. And but for me, it's not only old hat, but the significance of coincidence, coincidentally, so to speak, colloquial coincidentally, is quite significant. And so there was kind of, for me, a sense that my not sobriety, or in being non-sober, as being a real problem per se, but the mind frame, kind of a narcissistic globalism takes over, and that's weird to say. When I'm high, meaning I rotate my thoughts self-referentially, and then meaning the pathway is self-referential, and then the referencing becomes my interface with what's going on politically, or what's going on socioeconomically, or what's going on in my immediate environment. And so it's kind of a self-referencing and internal outward point that then scans and scopes any level of perceived socio-political domains that are far beyond my actual sensing them, just through onslaughts of particular media, which is very still, I mean, even with the internet, we're almost parsed away and funneled through just tunnels of thoughts. No way does anyone have, well, as far as I know, kind of an Xavier tapping into all global events. But nonetheless, to enter into the genre and focus on global events, external global events, law structures. There's a few things that are showing up for me, not just age, but this idea that indiscretions of the past will migrate and come to a head, meaning, as if you would, the 5G networks, or like, okay, so history doesn't repeat itself, but it sounds like itself, or it echoes in this punctuated time with the internet, with 5G, with information disclosure capabilities, like tracking the medium of the internet would be different than picking up a radio transmission of like World War II submarine, communication with a German sub communicating with Germany, something like that. Because this is, the internet apparently is leaving its hallmarks with only such things as server erasure, but the grander databases like the Utah Data Center and so forth should, even through router systems, any router system, any server system, at least the code, if maybe perhaps it's encrypted code, but at least the encrypted code should be there for future decryption. I think, and perhaps at some point there's a level of impossibility for decryption, but because I believe in a higher power. When I say higher power, this kind of brings up the disjunct between the Abrahamic notions of God as a single entity, and then living amongst Mormons who are polytheists, but concerning our planet, they're monotheists type of thing, world. And but in terms of considering a God, I say a Godhead, meaning the head of what appears to be a more powerful, dominant entity or series of entities that has greater insight or global, Earth global vision, as opposed to the Abrahamic notions of the omni God that covers all space and time. You could say that, like in Mormon theology, a localized or world-oriented God, a God that is granted to this world. I mean, if Mormons grant their own planet in the future, their own worlds in the future, that takes on a different domain. And then, as a side note, I was talking about the notion of elevating one's psyche to a power position in terms of self gratiation, when one seems to move up an insightful, almost geometrical insight into just how specifically unique they are to the world as the center of the world, where one then, not in a solipsistic fashion, but aligned akin to a solipsistic fashion, takes on one's self as VIP and should take on the world of VIP with a confidence, even if they have disabilities or detriments, or they find where it is pragmatically or socially they're lesser than anybody else, or any historic personage, to nonetheless shore up within themselves a type of blowing a pixie dust of confidence, if you will, back within their own sails, right? And taking on other individuals gregariously, needfully, and confidently, even such that they're able to generate battles, at the lines in which they might find themselves inferior, right? So, just the most confident warriors of different tribes meeting is a battle generally, right? Intellectually speaking, if you take on more of my orbiting approach to philosophy, some other individuals that I like that are autodidactic, as opposed to collegially, priestly, canonized, such that they have to grant over some sort of limitation to the formalities, almost the political philo formalities that occur within institutions that generate the academic literature. I like the rogue individuals such as like Wittgenstein, right? He may have gotten an honorary doctorate, as opposed to, let's say, a comedian who, like Will Ferrell, I think, got an honorary doctorate for speaking during a commencement. But I'm talking about somebody who injects something from the outside, a type of discourse or an analysis, and in Wittgenstein's case, the basis for expanding truth tables or Frege's truth tables, and as far as it relates to propositional logic out of the logical positivistic movement, meaning his doctorate was exceptional. And so I had always admired that, even to the point where when I was dating a Ukrainian woman getting her PhD several years ago, that she told me, Michael, go back to school and at least, in art, get your master's, because I only got a bachelor's. But she didn't say that, but she just said, well, move up within this, because, this is important. And I didn't see the importance, meaning the handle that the priests, those who acquire the PhD, get to laud over by the suffix, PhD on their name over those who are not. Because, for example, there's this Steve McRae guy, and he's trying to relegate the philosophical domain from like a media ecology or a communications domain, right? And so anytime, even though he himself does not have this PhD, his arguments he's attempting to align his arguments within the philosophical academic parameters from which to make what I think is a really trite distinction between those who might use a term such as agnostic atheism or agnostic theism versus parsing between those two and just saying theism and agnosticism as two non-conjunctive categories. And yet that's like the hill he's dying on or fighting on or whatever, as far as his sense of confidence. And he's grayed already. So, and I noticed this also with like Amendum. Amendum at one point was, younger and more vibrant. And we've watched him gray, and now there's kind of a starkness and an awareness, the death of his father, the movement from his dislocation, and more of like there's certain edges that are formed, like the spells that he's casting are the same or fewer. His critiques are becoming a little bit more nuanced, but basically the blade of his argument that we are organisms that will suffer and die, including animals, like for your mere enjoyment, this other sentient organism will suffer. For your mere notion of propagation, provided there's not some grand transhumanistic ability to make everyone live forever, or make your offspring live forever, then you are casting them into the same plight. And then my response always to that, my pushback to the antinatalist argument, not to get into that detail, but might as well, as these side notes of tangents, pockets of articulation that if I'm not in discourse where there's an arc, then and I know, I'm not scaling up in terms of YouTube population. I only have so many people that will follow me. But consider like multiple circles that are running tangential or may have an overlay to each other, right? And that those circles form a pattern, but each circle is its own genre. So it's like topic skipping. So I like to do side notes, and then sometimes those will fall into themselves, like a reiterated circle, unless like a kaleidoscope. And hopefully I can pop back out and grant the overarching theme of what I wanted to make the video about again. But sometimes I enjoy the side notes and involve myself there deeply. Anyway, so as a side note, as the pushback to antinatalism was always with a notion of our animalia and kind of a recognition and appreciation of the organism as an animal that lives and ages and dies, with the hope that one doesn't die, with the knowledge that one is suffering, but that the ongoing genetic reproduction of the next mind, along with historic artifacts, recent historic, like not archaeological, the archaeology of human genealogy, if you will, right? Meaning the media technology now, as opposed to the TV. Granted, if you want to grant the external world solidity, and for sane reasons you must, sanity's sake you must, but for theological reasons you don't necessarily have to abide by a kind of a concretization of declaring the ontology of aspects, items in your universe. Meaning the phenomenological domain, stemming from the individual with confidence, seems to override the need for the categorization of ontic facts, orientation to what you would consider an ontic fact. Meaning, I'm not at one point I would have attempted to walk through walls, jump off the roof, speed, socio pathology or pathologic entertainments with the type of confidence allows what I'll say, quote unquote, mutant powers to expose themselves within the individual. I think a lot of people, several people that attempt to pragmatize their universe, they don't want to move into what I think are not only esoteric knowledges, like an epistemology, but an esoteric phenomenological space where the claims of the uniformity of nature are so concretized such that the items to hand are considered just that everything takes on an item-oriented and less mystical or theologically possible notion, like, oh well, hey, I picked up this item and they were both concretized, but this one I want to run through, or this one I want to see if I can stick my finger through it. Why would I do that? How? Duh. Why do that? Right? But there is. That's why I'm like, in order to remain sane, one must have a global relationship with material items. As far as like the ontological status of a god, I think the philosophical debate is not fettering out what the referent is that they're talking about. I make claims that I have witnessed evidences of things that are not explained in any metaphysical, naturalistic sense, regardless of any secular atheist attempt to ground me or attempt to ground my experience or to confuse my claims of the experience away as merely a psychological delusion, or because they're in the past, then to push me against my memory. So I've traced purposefully through artistic form echoes of these items, as well as leaving what I think is a tracked legacy of discourse and speaking about this to some extent through the tubes. When I make my soul central, once again, shore up the confidence within the self of my being, as I look at my carcass age, right, then the notion of a displaced or an embodied soul comes about. And, for the Abrahamic traditions like to speak of, the soul, the body, the mort, is a shell of the soul. And I like Corey Anton's notion, because I am echoing of my time on here to some extent. But because I was explaining to this Mormon woman both the orb and the phone call from her dad that her granddad had died, and the association with the granddad and the orb being a tantamount gluing, like a mental gluing, and then how I had to reverse myself to tear apart the association in order to make the orb non-contextual and make the orb per se, to my experience, right? Excluding the coincidence. In this case, a slight time coincidence, but short enough to speak of, the time in order for someone to die, in order for the son to hear, and then the son to call the daughter. And anything that one's mind might just pull together as sensible. It's sensible, right? And so I had to back through that and honor the fact that what it was I was seeing, it had contextual associations, both not only to that, but to the painting that I was painting, which was a theater mask of the happy face and the sad face, as if I was also facing a decision for a happy life or a sad life, and that I chose away from my love at the time, away from her. And I think I damaged both of us severely, and she recuperated into a safety zone, parsing me away from her life. And that then I had to deal with the feng shui solo path that I had designated upon myself. And so it is that over time, since it's been, over 10 years since that event, I've been able to age. And so as I reach, I want to use the word crucible right now. And why? As I reach this gradient, as I'm moving forward in time alone, I find a similarity, notwithstanding the animosity I still hold against Gary, but that Gary's a solo guy. He's one of the few. I know a good handful of solo individuals that also have no children. And although I was just thinking about how any time now I might be getting a phone call from this nefarious activity about 9 months ago in a bathroom. Yeah, who knows? Who knows who could shore up? But that's just otherly thinking, wishful thinking. But my what I was going to say is, so I have certain commonalities, not necessarily meaning I have I'm not an anti-natalist, but I'm a non-natalist. And so by not nataling, I have that common with Gary, and the age and living away from a significant partner. To me, unlike Gary, I don't, I presume he's an isolate entity, where I am very gregarious and social. And my single nature has to do with the fact that because things were so emotionally devastating, that I would take like where my soul found its soulmate, and for merely kind of an idealism, I ended it almost to catapult myself into an ideal state itself, to remove my humanity, to remove my emotionality. It's almost like I wanted to become more android. And then these plays of being like an android. See, I may be facing some legal charges, and I'm not certain what those are, but I can speculate, and I speculate that I was utilizing this drive, how to put it, utilizing this kind of what one's the idea of identity or identitarianism, where one considers what one considers themselves. I mean, like I go to Amsterdam. I don't speak Dutch. Yeah, I don't speak Amsterdaminese with those Amsterdamanites. And but I could speak with Barklord, and a lot of them speak English. The majority of uh, Dutch there did speak English, but the point was is it showed a limitation right there, a pocketing, the convex limits of being, um, you know, the lion's share, over 99% of my existence is spent monolinguistically, both mentally within my signified eidetic realm, my mental space, as well as my speaking space. But my point is this: that the last time that I came close to falling in love, um, that battle raged on, I guess, over the last couple of years, and it fell apart a couple months ago. Meaning we were ricocheting back and forth. But as soon as we got to that heart center, like you're either gonna jump in and commit or not. With her, with this new woman, where I felt the tinge of love, I immediately pulled back and we talked about it and got back together. But then, because I didn't want to just like get together and then commit suicide again on my heart connected to her heart, like I did with the other woman, just destroying um, the love. But it was as if we couldn't quite get the cores or the seeds of our heart cores, like an apple core, if you will. If I'm going to distribute two seeds to her, two seeds, kind of like each heart has four veins or four um, pumping mechanisms, I wasn't going to share a common heart with her at core. And she, I believe, felt that I was. I think it was mutual, but for different reasons. In terms of hers, I think were more about bringing her into the scope of her relationship with kids that she doesn't have custody with or of, and because when her kids were there, she took on a different role naturally that was less able or adept to the free range non-children Bill Maher, Mike Vale kind of go play, do whatever. Hey, we're not the domestic cats, we're the wild cats on the outside. Free yourself from the range, come on out and play in the fields. And it's that thing, right? And so even though she's quite wild, she's quite off the cuff, and I could respect her linking to that. And perhaps it's still just me, once again, akin to a solipsism, my choice to enter into that realm. Seemed as if it was there, but it also appeared, and what became more solidified was my ongoing failure to commit to women, that I had commitment issues, and I was trying to track that through my family historic relationships relative to my mom wearing the pants in the family. Kind of, my dad taking on a background, like always supporting her needs role. And she doesn't need it, but just the format structure of my parents' dynamics as I inherited them, including the dynamic of having an older homosexual brother, but mostly, even though he was quite committed, but this notion that women are black widows, that when I didn't want the controls or the grip that would come on with it, although I was okay and encouraging the idea of raising children and being sufficient there. The dynamic of the relationship, like with the woman I broke up with way back when, Carrie, with the orb, the one I should have married, I didn't feel that there was any sort of notion that there was like this latent black widow that was going to come out. Even though maybe I had that suspicion, but with this new woman, it was almost as if she was waiting to get my heart so she could devour it. Something like that, right? Anyway, so the most recent relationship has gone away, and I'm kind of not wanting to reel it back, but now I realize that I'm also I'm oscillating between sobriety and drunkenness, and the entangled behavior with drunkenness reaches itself. It has its own pitch, high pitch. It's so weird. I'll listen to someone like Eric Orwell in this recent discussion he had with this other guy, something Jordan, I think, out of Australia. But something that's ongoing with Orwell is his, and I like that he's a moral realist, but I think he's attempting to stem it down theologically. I think he has a theological down consideration, as I do, probably for different reasons conceptually, but nonetheless, this the notion of pocketed hierarchies, grand hierarchies or pocketed hierarchies, really kind of piss me off. Not piss me off, meaning if one has a pyramidical hierarchy that's defined in structure and encoded in law or some sort of policy, tested through polemic and built, constructed as such, fine. You can have that defined. But anything that's considered like a power orientation, like animals, just to this ongoing, like the Jordan B. Peterson, animals live in a hierarchy, or anyone that's defining hierarchy when they're trying to talk about social systems or animal systems are simply denoting who has power, and then the distributed power of the other individuals within the group. But what it means to have power as an animal, or a hierarchy as an animal, is also, it's entropic, such that the older power then is challenged by the younger powers, and then troops and tribes or flocks separate. Murders of crows, flocks, herds, whatever the other names are for animal clumps. They change, right? And so, and this is kind of what I was trying to get at with hierarchies, right? Waves. Animals are blood-filled biologic systems that live and die, same as us. The institutions are hierarchical. The geometry is hierarchical. Our mental considerations of geometrical pyramids or such can be considered hierarchical, or that which is up, right? But waves, not wave functions, but looking at a wave, a crest. A wave starts as a pattern, and it migrates forward as it's moving. And eventually, it will either fall back into itself but as it reaches a hierarchical pitch, it will crest. The notion of a description of a cresting entropy, as we project the word hierarchy in even pocket, oh, a teepee, oh, look at all these teepees, look at these little hierarchies of Indians or historic UK mud huts or whatever, right? It's like, okay, they're shaped like a pyramid. The smoke goes up, they can be emblematic of a tribe like a pyramid. Pyramids, right? Obelisks and pyramids, and but a wave is indicative of the entropic nature of the human system. So the institutions and the geometry remain in hierarchy, but the projection onto what is attempted to be solidified as hierarchical is, and the thing that bugs me about Orwell is that he plays music. So he knows the gradient form function of waves, and yet he somehow will entail and prefer a preference to solidify the notion of hierarchy like a geometry, as opposed to, and which I think is preferencing the top-down kind of heavenly theological, so we can maintain this moral realistic state, such that it's not the spinning circles of tangents that have genres that can allow like externalities and annihilism of groups to occur. He, on the other hand, enjoys this kind of maintenance, and I mean, it's just like any other casting of a word, a projection of a word. Like, the thing that really upsets me about Steve McRae is he goes on his whim to tell when others are entering into the domain of that which is semantical, as if to parse that away is not only itself correct, but that he is making a demarcation line, or drawing a Rubicon, between the categories that are being considered within the philosophical domain and canon, to those which are orbiting external ecological, media ecology, communications, and or the eruditeness of the autodidacts that attempt to, read upon themselves and garner and develop what they consider their own justifications and articulations, whom do not have, any academic status. So anyway, and so to be categorized, such as the scapegoating of postmodernists, and even the grouping together of postmodernists, is kind of discouraging and disgusting. Meaning, there's so many Flemish or Dutch painters other than Rembrandt that were painting at least as well as Rembrandt. Schools of thought. Same thing with Van Gogh. There were plenty of other, Gauguin, and several other nominal, less known names that move in patterns, genres. 1960s comic books, 1970s twisted art, the lowbrow art that I was informed of stems through me, as opposed to modern concretized forms of fantasy, meaning where the object form, like, you might have a horse that has manes of feathers, but that it's still a horse, and the character, like fairies or anything that are fantastical, and I believe is due to video games and the solidification of forms. There's a coherence that is indicative of the modern aesthetic that seems to be propagated, with then defunct, like, juxtapositions of color or technique seem to be, coming about. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of my preference of, like, Nachos or Crayola and Nachos, Czar, A lot of lowbrow artists will maintain kind of a pull apart approach as opposed to something like Shepard Fairey, right? A poster graphic artist. He's more akin to modern two-dimensional character artists than these other individuals. Anyway, my point is and I'm not. I mean, I don't mean anything personal to when I talk about Eric. I don't have a clash with him. I haven't locked horns with him. With Steve, or I have no problem criticizing him because it's him projecting what he believes are the rules of the game. Because it's his game. It's his room that normally people are moving towards. So, meaning he's it's kind of like this guy Tomer. He took over Nadia Chambers' Google Hangouts as it moved to Discord, and he just owned it. And he's like this B-rate, very pragmatic, not very creative. I mean, he's not creative guy. I mean, he's changed, he's developed. I shouldn't attack him too much, but he took over the Google Hangouts, and then he really grounded them to his own, branded it, and he gets lots of traffic. But then he gets to be the moderator, the controller, right? So the same thing with Steve. Steve took over kind of the Great Debate community into Google Plus, then he trademarked it, then moved into the Non Sequitur show at the same time, roughly, that Google was getting rid of the Hangouts, and then moved into that, and then he's been fighting this same little argument that I talked about earlier with Aaron Ra and the other atheists, and even though, and it's really easy to parse through what his dilemma is. He'll say, look, I'm not an atheist. He says, I don't believe in God. I'm not an atheist, right? And then atheists will go, well, that's what it means to be an atheist. And he's like, no, because, but he's so about this he's about the method of argumentation, the method of debate, because he's attempting to win the debate and maintain this king of the hill, grand poobah bullshit. But the problem is he can say easily, I don't believe in God, and I don't, he can say, I don't believe in God, but I don't not believe in God, right? And so it's the conjunctive it's the combining of the propositions that allows him to say, hey, just because I don't believe in God, I'm not putting forth that, doesn't mean I'm an atheist, because I also he's undecided on the matter. He's not holding a relationship to the claims about God, or so he says. Which I think in itself is a type of meaning his considerations of God are probabilistic, and I understand the mind frame. I'm unsympathetic to it any longer. I used to be. Anyway, back to my orbs and stars, or my sense of possessions. The big wake up call, the big sobriety call, was not only my age, not my telos, meaning my ends, where I'm going, but my eschatological telos. My eschatological telos is a sense of thumbs up or thumbs down, not 5 stars, 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars, right? It had a binary dichotomy that is inherited throughout the Egyptian into the Abrahamic notions. Even the yin yang is otherly divided with a discrete squiggle line, as opposed to my Zen notion, right? In Zen notions of oneness outbound, the other is included almost solipsistically, because everything is a oneness. And so in the oneness, you don't have a mitosis or a breach. You don't have a binary or dichotomy. Right? But when one allows themselves into the mitosis membrane, is the split of the Zen, the split of the yin yang. Then the binary function of heaven, hell, these two different domains come into play, right? And unlike, it'd be like differentiating systems, right? Well, heaven is a differentiated flesh than, like, let's say it's bone, and hell is another differentiated flesh from heaven, and that it's skin, so something like that. No extracurricular meeting added. Anyway, so my point is that I had spent a great deal of time in kind of a determinism with a supplemental Christian ethic. As much as I eschew Christendom, I also take it in as much like it's a contradictory set, because I'm not about the exegesis and the eisegesis as much as it's more of a global inhale of information that informs me, and some of that information is Christendom. For me, the idea of a Christian faith or a born-again-ism is a type of forgiveness and salvaging of one's self out of one's despair with a name, a hidden name attached to said entity, Jesus, that is outbound and within. It's personalized because of its withinness, but it's outbound because it's declarative of its truth, quote unquote. But I also find that kind of, and when I say born againness, I mean just not even that in its orthodox sense. For me, it was a realization of one's soul as prime and as primacy. If one is fed up with their soul, then they are basically, I think, kneeling to the notion that they either don't know how to get out of a suffrage they would no longer like to bear, or that they're unwilling to disjunct their identity in order to slight a suffrage. Right? And in all the while, Jesus is saying, this is all right. And that somehow that is the, once again, I want to use the word crucible. Somehow that's the notion of being atoned for one's sins psychologically. It allows a type of bravery to come about, especially when you see those movies of the passive kids that finally get fed up and they close their fist and they go punch or fight for what they want. That type of shit, you know what I mean? Like, I encourage this guy, Asa, right? He's almost 30, right? There's so much that he hasn't done. Because I think there's a Puritan streak, meaning, hate me saying it, but doesn't have relations with women, even though he's heterosexual. He doesn't have, his flight of fancy is into the fantastical, mentally, imaginarily, and mythically. And he's predominant there, meaning he's predominant in my mythos. If certain people, like at one time I was interacting with Eric Orwell and somebody else commented, like, I've seen you for years and you, what do you say? He called me not a dark allure. I want to say allure. Basically, he was trying to white knight that my influence on Eric was of a dark illume. That's it. Like, I have a dark illumination or a dark Illuminati type of transmission that I would understand the dark arts, if you will, which I think I'm pretty good at. But that he wasn't allowing, me to say, no, I actually think that, that certain individuals that are older have some mentor-esque qualities to them that even my aged persona, or like at one point I was willing to unnerve Eric about his notion of the Anglo ideal based on his wife's eye color being brown or hair color being brown, something like that, to such as to defunct, like where two perfect pyramids would have a perfect overlay, and that was somehow emblematic of his idealism. And I was able to bring to light, like, oh, you'll never quite get that. What have you done? And then Eric got mad, and I guess this guy saw it and thought, how dare you? And someone just, it was something, but it was, to me, it was an argumentative point that got personalized. But because the precocious speed of younger generations is absolutely fascinating. I love it. And I love the internet, as well as their the IQ is I mean, it populates. You can see how relevant individuals can become, or how where my focus is. Like, oh, I find these individuals' focuses to be this way. But nonetheless, so there's this really creative kid. I call him a kid, who's almost 30. He's kind of kid-like in that he doesn't go through the general historic maturation of min-win relationships. He doesn't seem to move forward very quickly, very heavily, at a speedy clip into career modes. But because of this type of, whether it's outbound stagnation or mere anxiety that's delivering a type of stagnation, he is able, within that stagnation, to develop intricacies of the imagination and creativity at an absurdly, I think, a phenomenal rate. Not saying his techniques are unorthodox in terms of his art, but what he's producing seems to have enough mega potential at his fingertips now that I'm just trying to get him to bring it to market, but not to the internet market first, but to the social market, the in-person market. Like I just did this uncon. It's called Uncon. Helps me stay out of jail as a convict. I'm unconning myself, but it's a con. It's a con job. The whole thing was a con job. I didn't get paid for it, so let me just pun on the word con. It's Comic-Con. It's an unconventional con. It's the Uncon. It's so unconventional, few people showed up to it. Anyway, it was a shit show for the last 3 days, but I bared through it, made like $10 a day or something absurd. It's a trickle of humanity. Really bad thing. They arts fair on the outside. They scheduled it poorly. The main guy dropped out. They charged overpriced entrance tickets. The social media said it was closed. It was just a shit show. Anyway, that's done. Fine. Anyway, but so my problem, back to where I was at with all this, was that I don't mind interacting with people that are younger, because I've been around the block, and I've been around a block even where people contemporaneously my age that I interact with, I have in certain regards a thicker skin and a faster tongue, and mutability through the conversations, with a degree of humor that I get along very well socially. Even though if you guys watch me in Barklord, which you may have watched me in Barklord, like he was talking about a lot of stuff, and I was so like we were kind of getting along. I mean, I was walking through Amsterdam. He had just arrived in Amsterdam. He was tired. I was keeping him out late. I was throwing myself into insobrieties and pontificating, and I had my situation. It was our first meeting. He's actually very, he's not gaunt, but he's more gaunt than I am. Like, I'm a fleshed out dude, and he's much thinner, even though his persona, like, he's a tall dude, but he's thin. He's in shape. like his body solidity is well put together. He's not an out of shape guy. And he's interesting because he's had to maintain the structure both as a father, as an employee, and now as an adventurer of both the mind and new fascinations, new love interests with both Ireland and a woman in Ireland. I suppose he's going back to. I wish him really well. It was really peaceful to meet him, even though I was like, he's soft spoken like my dad, and a bit like my brother. He reminds me of my older brother, who he got to meet. Obviously differences, but it was just cordial. Like he's a cordial, in his own way, kind of Midwest, cordial, Americana guy that's making his way, and he's grounded in certain sensibilities, and yet he's not, and he doesn't overburden himself with esoteric topics where I overinflate tumorously, like a big tumor, like a hunchback, esoteric topics. Which I've always hated the inside of the philosophical canon because of my antagonism towards Anton. Not to defend his relationship with Amendum, but just because he was playing better than thou. And like Steve McRae said, I'm not word salad. I know what I'm talking about, but I might not process it the way the schools might want it processed. And so when I first intersected Anton way back when, I was making my anecdotes from my viewpoint at the time, and I was called word salad. And then anyone like Tom or in Discord or other people, they threw word salad at me, right? So now, I'm like coming back up out of word salad, but I got crazy. I'm still crazy. And so then you got this kind of left or humanistic, like treat me not with blades, some sort of like I'm kind of given a handicap, like in a bowling game or in some sort of match of some sort, because I'm considered crazy. Not crazy like dangerous crazy, even though I can put that off also, but crazy like oh, he's just mad, so don't talk over his head. You'll confuse the poor chap. He's nuts. He leapt off a building. Once again, walking through walls, walking through buildings. So I will say this. When I did leap off the building, physically and physiologically, I landed. Mythically, I landed it like Superman. Theocratically, I leapt after guilt of missing my Jacob's ladder in an attempt to get to Stargate, to leap, right? And then a year later, after the nursing home and the shitting diamonds, and then I mean that metaphorically, shitting coal lumps and getting into wheelchairs and walkers and canes and back on my feet, and then driving, and then being possessed through a geometry that it was internalized with a pentagram. That there's a pentagram. Each point of the pentagram had a different color associated it, and each one also had an organ associated to it. And this was written by a friend of mine, Jonas, and it was pinned to my wall. And before I was, I'll say, by a higher power, through coincidence, recognizing through bodily happenings, even now there was a shift in the house, right? It's totally justifiable through wind and weight and population of the building, but the fact of it occurring now takes on its theological significance to me, right? But so if I got a pain in my side or my stomach started to rumble, I could coordinate that with a color. My liver, my heart, my brain, my lungs, right? And as I felt something, there was a color codic that I had that in and of itself was also directional. So it was like a map compass, or there's another word for it. Nonetheless, it was an orientation field that covered the gap between color themes and internal sense themes. So while I was driving and being possessed, if my stomach hurt or there was an indicator in my lungs, there was a code to read within it outward, right? As if you aren't just treating your body as if the organs are incidental, right? I'm Egyptian. Egyptians, these are honorable organs. They have canoptic jars for your organs. The brain is sucked out the nose and thrown away. That's nothing. That's merely the antenna. But the organs, those are there as characterizations to inform you of something. It's not what the content is, merely of things that you digest. It's the fact that it is there that one needs to allow into their theological lexicon or their portfolio, if you will, of consideration. This seems to be where the secular atheist and kind of those more grounded in methodological naturalism or mere naturalism, right? They pragmatize. So their levels of consideration, even if they could move them up, their preference is to keep them down, keep them earthly, keep them keep the explanatory values in line with a type of modern scientific approach to what a thing in the world is. My ontology towards my liver is not dissimilar to this. That's fine. But my ontic positioning to my liver can grant over a space such that now, when I feel it pang or my lungs hurt, I can remember a codic that it itself is thinking of itself, like in Fight Club. Jack's, I am Jack's liver. Blah, blah, blah. I am Jack's over-exact lungs that I ran all night. It's a third-person reascription. And so all media, all concepts, all facts, all symbols, to garner the matrix notion, philosophically speaking, is spoken of by Susskind and many other people. Leonard Susskind, not philosophically, but physically. As a physicist, he speaks on this. To embed this, imbue this. The modern canon, what's considered the intra versus the inter notion of the canons of philosophy, the canons of thought, the genres of thought, that policing that like McCrae will use simply for argumentative sake, it's more diffuse and it's less discreet than he's wanting to garner, but he'll keep dropping that, well, which PhDs, which academically reviewed paper. Well, Susskind has his PhD in physics, and yet he'll philosophize about voxels and black holes and being in a matrix. And so if one is in the matrix, the feminine womb of God, if God is some amorphous bigendered entity, or whether or not you take on a Mormon notion of God the Father and Goddess the Mother sort of thing, then the matrix is your world. You are in a teacup. You're in a teacup, and as the teacup is full, you see all of the other entities in it, the little items, the material items, and you see the other individuals in this teacup. And then, when the teacup is emptied, on the wall of the matrix are the leaves. The notion of astrology or the esoteric acts of reading the tea leaves, as if the very patterning of a tea leaf where the water is emptied is your matrix. Now, this matrix is readable. It's readable within your body and outside of your body. One of you might look at this and say, oh, look at the cross. Or, oh, I don't even see this bottom part. I barely see this bottom. time, right? Or you might be focusing on the two dots, or maybe my eye's relation to the two dots, or the way the aesthetic composition is of this very video, right? You may find some sort of significance or signification of that which is appearing before you. Anyway, so this is really at 115 or an hour and 15 minutes. The reason we don't go over 60 minutes in an hour and it just skips up to 100 is because it is against the it's negative to get to 70-minute clocks, because you would have 60 minutes. You would have 66 minutes and 60 seconds or 6 seconds. So like 13 stories are often not built, or the 13th story is removed out of a hotel. We also have organized an anti-Karnak version where the energy flow, the language itself is not formatted for 9s, 3s, and 6s to take on a day-to-day approach. You don't want 666s all over the place, because that is indicative of an internalized, narcissistic, less I don't know. I mean, historically, even atheists, it's kind of like the Jordan B. Peterson. Like, he'll come in at theism as a mythic structure that's to be read. He's not abiding by Christendom specifically. He's not ignoring it. He's kind of like, he's got some elements of it, right? I'm not dissimilar in that. I'm dissimilar in approach. And all I'm saying is we're kind of embedded already within our calendar system, within our clock system, within our legal system, within how we pragmatize our science. Which, don't get me wrong, science needs to be pragmatized and it needs to be peer-reviewed. I'm not saying anything against that. I'm just trying to say there's other ways to perceive a universe than merely this pragmatic collapse and this getting along because you can get along in the way. Oh, don't look at that too hard. You don't need to look at that in any heavy detail. There's no reason to look at that in any in-depth or meta. Don't look at the composition of light as if it has some specific meaning, or my hairdo, or anything that you're bringing as an eisegesis to this video, right? Meaning, I like talking to this Mormon guy, like, hey, you can talk till you're blue in the face, just like all you Muslims and you Mormons. I said, but look, I would rather hear an experience that you had of something super phenomenal that grounds a root. I'd rather hear a ghost story that you sensibly, not that you through memory had, not that you coincidentally observed through your senses, but seeing something that you would call a thing that exists beyond secular. I said, otherwise you're just projecting through texts with your eisegesis, or you're pulling from a text, your exegesis. And that somehow, like a follower, you're just following somebody else. Like Muhammad saw the Jacob's ladder, maybe dissimilar than mine. Apparently he climbed his, right? And Joseph Smith, he saw God the Son and God the Father. He claims the supernatural thing, just like alien abductors. The experiencers are the ones that have my heart, right? Those are the ones after my heart, so to speak. And that's what everyone else, they're just following. They're just going along to get along. They're believing it. They can have faith all they want. That's great. I'm just saying, they're a different kind of theological human than those who have sensual testimonies of entities as opposed to mere choreographing of coincidence. Not that I'm trying to say coincidence doesn't have its reason. There's a possession that comes along with this. And so back to my story. So not only did I jump and ruin my body physiologically, but I'll say this. In physics, for all action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. On a mythic matrix, spiritual, that which is unseen, by jumping off the roof and landing on the ground and denying what is held as most religious, as uniformity of nature, including gravity, I, a human without wings, decides, like Danny and Xanadu, to run through the wall to meet Kira, the daughter of Zeus. I'd leap off a roof more akin to that than attempting to deny gravity or attempting anything. But by landing spiritually, cosmically, kind of like justifications for aliens hearing radio waves, since we started putting radio waves in TV. You know, we've had those movies like, oh, we heard your radio waves, so we knew to come to that planet. Well, now we have internet radio waves. Now we have internet waves. And so now we have alien others here engaging in all of our engagements. I could speculate, right? I'm not going to say that's the case, but I believe it as kind of a God's eye, not only intervention, right? There's so many people, they want to say, hey, just grant up pyramids, humans did it. I'm not saying humans didn't do it. Or I'm not going to say humans didn't make the internet. You could say, oh no, it was a craft that was rebuilt from the Roswell thing, and we reverse engineered it, and we developed the internet, and then we pushed it on our own. Like the Chinese, we helped out. We made things better. For all future connotations, apologize. It sounds derogatory, but whatever the fuck. Anyway, the point is this: that whatever it is that we have has a cosmic echo and cosmic feedback. And so me jumping off the roof as an individual, and I'm not encouraging, please don't take this as me encouraging anyone else to jump off a roof. But by me jumping off a roof and hitting the ground and smashing myself with the will that I had in the Matrix, mythically, the wave went out, and about 11 months after, the wave came in, and through the codec, and through my body, and through being able to read the tea leaves and the symbols in my environment, I was guided and possessed both through the ecology of radio, actual radio in my car, and license plates and symbols and events and moths and birds and everything, informing me that my location was in this particular direction, guiding me up to Montana. Late at night, jury's full, Semper Fi, fully faithful, walk the line. You're walking with Johnny Cash. You're falling in rings of fire, or you're walking that line because you already did fall into that ring of fire. And that can be used as a faithful event. Anyway, point is, drawn, possessed all the way up to Montana, late at night, alone on the highway, something like the big red jellyfish star, that which could have been my big He-Man. It could have invented me by the power of whatever this is. Boom! It could have fed me. I could have entered it. It itself could have been the Stargate. So it was expressing to this Mormon woman. So she's like laying out their theology of salvation. I said, well, I heard that there's this one theological sect or way of thinking. It's your goal, like in the movie Ready Player One, to solve some grand thing by unorthodox moves. That theologically, it is our goal to leave the planets. find the stargates. But it's up to you to get through all the minutiae and all the propaganda and all of what the devil or my friend that gave me the codex, he deciphered this book of an esoteric ex-Buddhist martial art philosopher that I gave to this guy that I was yet to see. That 5 ghosts are out to kill you. 5 ghosts. For what it means. Right? I guess there's some ghosts that aren't trying to kill you. Nonetheless, discernment of one's own thoughts as one's own thoughts, as opposed to one's own thoughts as one fed from one side of a mitosis binary genre and the other from another genre, as if you're always choosing paths into your future at every moment, into grand over agency and choice and free will in and within what could be argued the pushback of the deterministic universe is still at play. But once again, my burdens, my damnation, my sense recent of my post-enlightened eschatological salvation was that God is very, very mad at me. And I don't think it's for drug use per se or in sobriety. It's for the behaviors that are entailed. It's for how it is I haven't treated my human carcass, my one time on this planet, which I'm granting over an hour and a half to you guys. Wasn't certain this is where I wanted to take the video, but you know, it's the way it goes. So, peace in the Middle West, Utah!